following unrated program contains adult language and subject matter, and we directly advise your viewer discretion to be advised.
With the thing in the MWG-TV and the stuff and our claims about the properties intellectual, we don't use them, we don't own them, we talks about them and the stuff. All the content in the show and the thing and the like, we use it without talking to the people who owns the stuff. Fuck you. Times.
So, going into how to play the game and how to play the game properly, as well as a kind of boiling down our kind of view of tactics in the game that we do at the same time, we're going to go ahead and go into the movement phase, talk about first off how you do it properly, second off how you do it tactically.
Correct.
Last time we talked about
deployment
and the tactical issues with that. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to talk about movement. So first off, let's start with the movement phase.
Correct.
First thing you do in the movement phase.
What page of the rule book is that on, Hyde?
Page 11 starts the movement phase chapter and goes through the entire thing all the way back to fucking page 14. It's a short fucking chapter. What's the first thing you do in the movement phase, Parker?
That's actually a really good question.
It's a trick question.
Well, I'd say make sure your army list is handy.
That would be good. Absolutely make sure your army list is handy.
And also have your tape measure handy.
Okay.
And
I check for my cock and balls every 3.5 minutes, so I would probably check for my balls and my cock.
My cock and
make
balls
sure
are attached. I mean, occasionally they float off and go to like the fucking Disney World or something.
Yeah,
but,
I understand. What's the first thing via the rules you're going to do in the movement phase?
Well, probably would be to do any kind of like a rolling for deep strike.
Rolling for reinforcements.
That's what I meant. You know what I meant.
That's the first thing you should do. You should get out your list. You should see what you're going to have come in from reinforcements.
Right.
You're going to roll to see what arrives that turn, and then you're going to go about arriving it that turn.
The funny part was when you were giving me that shit, I was thinking, are we talking about like the first turn? Because I always think like first turn stuff. Because we know that in the actual game, you don't do reserves on the first turn.
Right.
The only weird time that you're actually going to do reserves would be...
that's not necessarily true
I was going
depending
to say
upon your
demons and also on Space Marine drop pods.
Dark Angels?
Well, I look at that as the same way as Space Marine drop pods.
I'm glad you look at it that way, but you need to do it first.
Oh, you know, I mean...
All right, so first thing you're going to do in the movement phase, you're going to roll for your reserves.
Absolutely.
We all know on turn 1, they technically don't come in.
Correct.
Unless your army has a special rule. On turn 2, you're going to need a 4 or better for each unit on a d6.
Correct.
On turn 3, 3 or better, so on and so forth. Now, when I'm rolling for this, I put my list on the table.
Yep, I've got mine handy too.
I then I go down the list. I roll a dice for each unit on the list. If I take that die result, I don't change the result. If the result's a 4, I pick up the die and I put it right next to the name of the unit that I rolled for.
Now, keep in mind, this obviously helps if you've got enough sideboard space, or if you've got a nice empty spot on the table.
I just put it right on the fucking table. There should be space on the table where you can fit a piece of paper.
Well, if there's not, then fuck your mom.
All you got to fit is this on a 6x4. You're going to fucking have space. So, I roll for each unit. Then I take that dice and that result and put it by each unit's name. Now, I'm also narrating this for my opponent, saying, rolling for my land speeder. Oh, I didn't get it. Put it right there. Rolling for my attack squad. Oh, I got him. Sweet. Put it right there.
Yep.
When I'm done, I go from top to bottom, and I pick the first unit. You technically don't have to. It just keeps it easier for me.
Yes.
And I decide where it's going to come on, and I move it on the board. Or I deep strike it on the board, or I outflank it on the board.
Now, this is another point. Remember how, like, last time we talked a little bit about going down through your list and doing things, going up and down through your list.
Going down on my list? What?
But keep in mind that once you actually pick up a unit, and start to fiddle fuck around with it. Guess what?
Yes.
That unit has to go.
Yes.
Now that unit has to go before you do any other regular movement.
Yes.
So your reserves movement must occur before any other regular movement.
Yes.
And it involves picking up that squad or that vehicle or that unit of some type and doing something with it.
Yes.
Now, you should keep an eye on the figures in your army, the things that are coming in on reserve, the amount of space that you have to put stuff, and you don't want to do things like try and position a vehicle behind something else unless you want to leave it there, because you can't move through your own friendly shit.
Unless there's a space wide enough to allow you to
Precisely.
move through. Yes.
Unless you have a wide enough space to do so,
Yes.
you can't run a Rhino between two Space Marines.
No. So, first thing, you bring in your reserves.
Correct.
Move them onto the table. When you move a unit, well, when you don't move units, you move models.
Correct.
When you move a model, you place your tape measure. First off, you measure out the distance that model can move. If that model can only move 6 inches, I only want to see you pull your tape measure out 6 inches. I don't want to see you pull it out 18 inches, lay it down, and then take a look, and then look back, and then go, oh shit, he can only move 6 inches. You just pre-measured for shooting. I know what you're fucking doing, you fucking cock ass.
Yep.
So anyway, you put it down for each model, and you put the 6-inch mark for infantry, say, at the beginning of his base. You hold it there with one hand, you pick the model up, and you move it to the end of the tape measure.
And when you're talking about reserves, the end of your base
Yes.
is the table
board
edge.
edge.
So
Yes.
literally,
well, the start of your base
exactly
is the board edge.
The
You
front
do not
edge.
you do not place the model on the board and then move it.
Correct.
You measure
6
the
inches
start
from
of
the
your
board edge.
movement from the board edge and then move on to the table.
Yep. Anything else is cheating.
Yes. Well, it's incorrect.
It's cheating in a different name. It's either
fine
advertent
with
or
that.
inadvertent cheating.
Definitely inadvertent. It could be. I don't know. It's not correct.
Yes.
So, after you bring on your reserves, remember that you can only move one unit at a time, and once you have moved a unit, you may not move it again.
Yes.
So you select a unit. You say, I'm going to move my Space Marine Tactical Squad. You start moving that unit. Every model in the unit can only move up to its maximum distance.
Correct.
6 inches for infantry,
Correct.
12 inches for jump infantry.
Now there are some common conventions that occur if you've got a lot of figures to move, and it's very obvious that you are going to do something like run a
Right.
squad. A common convention, even though this is out of order, a common convention is to roll your running dice and move the total.
Hate it. Hate it when people do that.
I understand.
I hate it when people do that because it moves a unit farther in that phase than it should have.
Correct.
And that may allow you to move another unit behind it.
This is also very true.
Because let's say I have my Space Marine Tactical Squad. They only move 6 inches. And I say, you know what, I'm going to run, so I'm going to roll this at the same time. I roll a 6. Well, now that Space Marine Tactical Squad has moved 12 inches forward. Well, now I've got an additional shooting lane open.
Correct.
I've got space for my jump infantry to go behind. I've got space for, I've got all kinds of space that I shouldn't have had in the movement phase.
But here's a question for you.
I do not let people run in the movement phase.
So another question for you, though, is that if that run would absolutely not affect further phases, would you allow it? So, like, for instance, now I'm going to take into account the use of... Now, by the way, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, because I'll let people do it in a friendly game.
Sure.
In a friendly game, playing around, just trying to speed things up.
Okay.
I got no problem with it. In a tournament situation, I'm going to be a little stricter.
Yes.
Because the strict rules of the game say you don't do that.
No.
You have to move your models. In the movement phase, they move their movement amount.
Yes.
In the shooting phase is where they run.
Yes.
But in a friendly game.
Yes.
So in this friendly game, where this is happening, would it be fine to move up if, for instance, you had an assault squad back there that even if you jump them up in the movement phase, they would still have effectively gone through the infantry no problem.
It makes a difference because it's giving you knowledge of something that's going to happen in the shooting phase before you get to the shooting phase.
Fair enough.
Let's say that you've got a unit with fleet.
Yes.
And you move that unit in the movement phase and you say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and run these guys. Well, you're running them. They have fleet. You're intending to get an assault off.
Sure.
Well, you go, you roll for your run, you get 1 inch. You realize I can't get that assault off. That changes the rest of your movement with your other units.
Fair enough.
Because now you're like, well, shit, they're not going to get the assault off. That gives you additional information from a future phase that you shouldn't have had in the movement phase.
You know what? I like that thought.
I find it, and plus, let's not forget, unless you're playing a orc horde army where you've got 120 orcs.
Yeah.
And your entire army, all they're going to do is march across the table. 9 times out of 10, that's not going to be the case. 9 times out of 10, you get a 10-man attack squad. You know what? Stop being so fucking lazy. When you get to the shooting phase, roll a d6 and move your 10 dudes.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, and you know, that's the same way that I do it. Obviously, I pay very close attention to the rules because I don't want to play a bad game of 40K.
I like the rules. The rules aren't that hard to comprehend.
You know what? These guys spent 20 years making those rules.
They did. They spent a lot of money on this book. Fucking read it.
Yeah.
So anyway, you pick one unit. You move that. You move each model in that unit up to its maximum movement phase.
Yep.
Then that unit is done.
Once you've taken your hands off and effectively said, I'm now done with my tactical squad, you really can't go back and say, oh, shit, I meant to move them around a little bit.
Yes.
Can't do it.
Now, remember that when you are moving a model, so a model may not move within 1 inch of an enemy model unless you're assaulting it.
Correct.
Now, that doesn't mean may not end its move within an inch of an enemy model. It means may not
move
within an inch of an enemy model. So if you're trying to move your tank past an enemy tank, and you cannot move your tank
within
an inch of an enemy tank unless you are ramming.
Unless your tank, ramming. Yes, right.
Totally, yes. So bear that in mind when moving. Also, you may not move a model through the same space as another model, regardless.
Friendly or enemy.
You may not move through a gap smaller than your own base size.
Correct.
That's the distance it takes you to use. If you've got a unit with models with different speeds, say you got a chaplain with a jump pack inside of a tac squad, that unit moves 6 inches.
Yep.
It does not move faster than that. You move at the speed of the slowest model in the squad.
If you've got a squad that has slow and purposeful and another model within that squad that doesn't, guess what? That model moves as slow and purposeful.
Yes.
Unless that model is separating from the squad.
Yes. Now remember that turning and facing, of course, models can turn any direction.
Yep.
Whether they're tanks or troopers.
Turning in place does not count as moving.
If you're locked in close combat, you don't get to move.
Correct.
Okay. Remember that when you're moving a tank, the side of the tank that you're measuring, like let's say you're moving a tank directly ahead, you measure from the front of that tank to the front of the tank so that the front edge of that tank only moves 6 and or 12 inches.
Or 18 or 24 or whatever the fucking tank happens to be.
Unit coherency, when you're moving a unit,
yep,
such as a unit of infantry, their bases need to stay within 2 inches of each other.
Correct.
They need to end their move within 2 inches of each other, of course, because they get a 6-inch move. That would make for some horrible bullshit.
Exactly.
If, you didn't keep coherence, if you had to keep coherency during that. So, don't forget to do that. To check that, all units must end inside of coherency.
Now, this is actually a nice little deviation here. So we're talking about squads when you move and coherency and so on. So if you get your shit shot up in the shooting phase, we're coming to the